morning, everyone. One of the very powerful lines that were spoken at AIPAC was from the United States Ambassador to Israel, David Friedman. And as you know, on the second day of AIPAC, on Monday morning, news came in that Hamas had sent fired rockets into Israel, and a rocket landed on a home in, I think it was Kfar Saba, I'm not sure, and flattened the home, and miraculously the family managed to get out just in time to the shelter, and they were spared. But there were other people injured, and God forbid, it could have been a lot worse. And David Friedman got up at AIPAC in front of 18,000 people, and he said, that missile that was fired from Gaza by Hamas into Israel wasn't aimed at an Orthodox Jew, it wasn't aimed at a conservative Jew, it wasn't aimed at a Reform Jew, it wasn't aimed at a Sephardic Jew or an Ashkenazic Jew, it was aimed at any Jew. Because in the eyes of our enemies, there's no difference. We may think religious, not religious, this persuasion, that persuasion, doesn't matter. They're just targeting Jews. And we have to learn from them that if they see us as one nation and they make no distinctions between us, surely we have to see ourselves as one nation, not see any distinctions between us. In this week's Parsha, one of the main central subjects of this week's Parsha is the laws of kosher. And the Torah tells us how to identify kosher birds, kosher fish, and kosher animals. And of course, the way to identify an animal that is kosher is it has to have two signs. It has to be malat gera, which means it has to chew its cud, and mafris parsa, it has to have split hooves. And then the Torah goes on to say, what's if there's an animal that has one of the two signs? So just like you can't be half pregnant, you can't be half kosher. Either you're kosher or you're not. So the Torah says if an animal only has one of the two signs, it's not kosher, because it needs to have both. Incidentally, this is one of the sources that proves that the Torah could have only been written by God, not by human beings. Why? Because the Torah then goes to proceed in this week's Parsha to tell us that there are 4 animals in the universe, on planet Earth, that have one of the two signs. The Torah says 3 of them, the camel, the hyrax, and the hare, they have the sign of chewing their cud, but they don't have split hooves. And the pig is the 4th one that has split hooves, but doesn't chew its cud, and therefore they're not kosher. Now imagine, the Torah wrote this 3,300 years ago. Over the past 3,300 years, we've discovered many new continents and thousands of new animals. It's impossible for a human being living in a desert without technology, without Animal Planet channels or whatever, to know definitively that there's only 4 animals in the world. If we discovered a 5th or a 6th animal that has one of the two signs but not the other, that would refute the Torah, because the Torah says definitively there's only 4 such animals. Which human being would go out on a limb and say something like that, knowing that I'm in one location? I don't know what's going on in the rest of the universe. I didn't travel the whole world. I'm not a zoologist. What do I know? Only God, who created every creature, could say that definitively. So that's just one of the sources that the Torah is a divine document, not written, authored by human beings. But here's what the Torah does. The Torah says, the Torah lists the 4 animals, the Torah says they're not kosher. You know why? So you would think the Torah would say, well, the pig's not kosher because it doesn't chew its cud. The camel's not kosher because it doesn't have split hooves. That's not what the Torah does. Every time the Torah explains why each one of these 4 animals is not kosher, first the Torah says, although the camel does have does chew its cud, but it doesn't have split hooves. Although the pig has split hooves, but it doesn't chew its cud. In other words, what does the Torah do? It lists the kosher sign first. And then it says, even though it has the kosher sign, it doesn't have the other. Now, if the Torah is trying to be short, and brevity is the key to the Torah, there's no extra words, why not just say the pig's not kosher because it doesn't chew its cud? What do we have to mention, although it has split hooves? The Torah is teaching us a very fundamental lesson. Even when you have to point out that something's not kosher, first point out why it is kosher. In other words, first recognize, first identify, first admire the positive trait. And then you say what is missing, what's lacking. But don't get straight to the negative. First focus on the positive. And if you treat a non-kosher animal that way, surely you have to treat your fellow human being that way and give them the dignity and the respect to acknowledge first what's good about them before you point out what's flawed and what's lacking. And that's the idea of seeing the positive in others. There's one of the speakers at the APAC convention in one of the breakout sessions. His name was Arthur Brooks. He's I guess a philosopher. He wrote a book, many books. And he told an interesting story that he put out a new book recently, and he got this email from this person from a different state who wrote him this nasty email saying, I read your book and you don't know what you're talking about, you're completely wrong. And the guy sends this long email citing chapter and verse, refuting all of his points throughout the whole book. Really angry letter, you know. And he sat down and he said, how am I going to respond to this guy? And this is what he did. He wrote him back at him and he says, Dear so-and-so, I have to tell you, I worked 5 years on this book. I poured my heart and soul into this book. And I am so appreciative of the fact that you took the time to actually read every page of my book. And you read it so thoroughly that you're quoting every chapter and every verse. And he says, you know, we may disagree, but I'm just so grateful for you that you took so much interest in my book. And I really, really appreciate that. And that changed the whole tone of the conversation. The next email was, oh, nice to meet you too. Thank you very much. He says that they started this email correspondence, and then at one point he says, listen, if you're ever in Philadelphia, I'd love to take you out for dinner one night, you know? They became good friends, right? He said, if I would have answered with anger, that would have been the end of it. But because I saw the good in him, the positive, and I celebrated that, it turned into a wonderful relationship. And that's what we need to learn amongst us Jews, that everyone has good in them, and you could always see the good in others. If you're only seeing the bad, that's not a good sign. That means you're not looking honestly and objectively, because if you're truly seeing someone objectively and honestly, you would first acknowledge the good even before you recognize what's not good.